agenda moving. We have a really wonderful panel today to discuss implementation of mobility as a service in rural areas. And this is a confluence of information and transportation commodified in a way to support service access for our customers. Basically, it's a way to make it easier for multimodal, multi-option transit to be supported and shared in rural areas. So today we have experts to do that, and I'm going to go to the, are you going to do the slides, Kara? Great. I'm going to do the housekeeping. And so this webinar will be recorded and then available at National RTAP training webinars on the National RTAP YouTube channel. If you have questions during this webinar, please put them in the Q&A box. They will be addressed at the end of the program. We will actually answer all the questions, but if we have so many that we are not able to do it by the end of the webinar, we will be posting answers on the website. If you're having trouble with your Zoom, chat with us. And at the end, we have a very brief post-webinar survey to get from you what worked and what didn't work about this, and maybe what you would like to hear next. Please stay tuned for additional webinars on this topic and other topics that are related to this around mobility, technology, and coordination. Next, National RTAP is a FTA-funded technical assistance program. We are set aside from the 5311 program, which is rural, the non-formula or non-urbanized formula. So 5311, it's the tribal program, 5311C, and it's the intercity bus program, 5311F. So we work with 5311 grantees in all those areas, and we provide free training materials and technical assistance to rural, tribal, and intercity providers, as well as state DOTs that administer the national or the state rural transit assistance program. We have a review board that is made up of 7 state DOTs and 8 actual rural and tribal transit agencies from across the country. We have just added a tribal person to the review board. We do have tribal members and have had tribal review board members, but this is a specific one. We provide resources in different channels. We have trainings that are available online, e-learning, and printed materials. We provide information on best practices, and that can be little tech briefs, 1 or 2 pages, maybe 3 pages, topic guides that'll give you access to a series of articles or other training materials or information, and technology tools, which can help you with your federal procurement, cost allocation as part of partnership development, website building, and GTFS to help you with your customer information and, of course, NTD reporting. We do peer networking with state DOTs, tribal programs, transit managers, and intercity bus operators, and people who are interested at the state level in intercity bus. And you can just call us, and we'll answer your questions or find people who can. Thanks, Kara. So, Rebecca, we are doing this project in coordination, this webinar in coordination with AASHTO Transit Management Group, and Rebecca Onger is here to talk about them.
Thanks so much, Robin. And likewise, I and AASHTO are always very glad to work with you and with National RTAP on whatever project we have coming down the pipeline. For those who don't know, AASHTO is a nonprofit, nonpartisan association representing the state DOTs and all transportation modes on behalf of state DOTs. So we do have a long-standing partnership with National RTAP that we enjoy supporting, especially through our AASHTO Transit Management program. AASHTO Transit Management is the program sponsored by our Council on Public Transportation to advance state DOT transit technical initiatives. We do this through a variety of state-led efforts, including a state's working group on shared mobility topics, as well as through partnerships with other organizations. Most recently, AASHTO Transit Management held a state DOT roundtable during the 2025 CTAA Expo. At the Expo, we coordinated with National RTAP, who held a peer exchange lunch on the same day for what was combined a day and a half of discussions focused on state and transit agency coordination and state and national public transportation developments. So we're very glad to continue that conversation on a different topic, but an equally important one on today's webinar. For those interested, AASHTO Transit Management also holds monthly virtual calls, which are open to all state DOT staff. And like National RTAP's great resource, we put out a biweekly e-news, which has latest updates on AASHTO, FTA, and the transit world. You can subscribe to the e-news on our website, and please email AASHTO if you'd like to get involved in what we do. Our contact information will be at the end of the webinar. But so for today, state DOTs across the country are invested in the advancement of innovative transit technologies like mobility as a service, and rural communities are key recipients of the transit services which state DOTs support. So I'm very excited for today's presentations, and I would like to hand off to our moderator for today, Jana, to introduce today's webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. So I'm Jana Leinert, and for the last year and a half, I've been an independent consultant, really focused on transit technologies that can improve the lives of the traveling public, myself included. And I offered to organize this webinar for National RTAP and AASHTO because I have a firm belief that the concept behind mobility as a service, as well as some of the evolving technologies, are very relevant to rural America as well. So prior to becoming an independent contractor, I spent 17 years with the AARP Public Policy Institute, where I led their transportation research agenda. And I had the opportunity to really dive deep on many different topics related to transportation. But if you can go to the next slide, one of the papers I published back in 2018 was entitled Universal Mobility as a Service. And if you all recall, in 2018, our industry, there was a lot of hype around mobility as a service as a way of, enabling customers to access transportation services as opposed to having to rely on their personal automobiles. And as we've seen, this hasn't really played out in the revolutionary way that that was talked about back in 2018. But I think a lot of the concepts are still extremely appropriate, and we're seeing mobility as a service being built out in more incremental ways. But most of what was being talked about in 2018 was really centered around big cities. And I wrote this paper, Universal Mobility as a Service, and coined that term to really emphasize the need to plan and design systems that work for everyone in the community, as well as every community, including rural areas. So how do we design a system where older adults can access services, people with disabilities, those who live in rural areas and rely on public transportation? But at its heart, Universal Mobility as a Service is really about a single integrated network of both traditional and non-traditional services that together serve everyone. It inherently implies universal design, which is a design concept that says, okay, you don't just tack on accessibility after you've completed a project, you do it from the outset. You really look to understand what the traveling public's needs are and design for everyone. But in the end, it offers one-stop shopping, easy discovery, easy booking, easy mode transfers, and easy payment. So that's really the concept behind mobility as a service. So with that introduction, let me introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker is Elliot McFadden, and Elliot was recently promoted as supervisor of the Mobility Management Unit in Minnesota DOT's Office of Transit and Active Transportation, where he oversees the state's shared mobility program, Federal Transit 5310 funds for services for older adults and people with disabilities, and management of a multimodal parking and transit facility. Now, I have to believe, since I've known Elliot for a few years and have tracked his work on mobility as a service, that this promotion that he recently got is in no small part because of his ability to form partnerships, convene stakeholders, keep them at the table. It's all part and parcel of how to make this stuff work. So congratulations to him. And we're going to hear from him about his award-winning Mobility as a Service project. Our second speaker is Christine Corrales. She is a San Joaquin Valley native from Stockton, California. She's very interested in the intersection between social and public health issues in that intersection with urban planning. She has a Bachelor of Science degree from UCLA in anthropology with a minor in Asian studies and a master's degree in urban and regional planning from Portland State University. Christine serves as the manager of planning with San Joaquin Council of Governments, where she leads a team focused on clean mobility and community partnerships. The SJCOG team recently completed a pilot project in partnership with Demand Trans Solutions to integrate car share and ride-hail options into a mobility as a service app serving the San Joaquin region. And that app is white labeled as the Vamos Easy Hub mobility app. And our third speaker today is Roger Teal, who's president of Demand Trans Solutions. He owns a transportation technology company that he founded 30 years ago. And I actually had the privilege of meeting Roger about in 2014 at the the International Paratransit in Rural and Inner City Bus Conference in Monterey. But Roger's kind of reputation as a giant in the field of demand responsive transportation preceded this acquaintance. And I have only since learned an incredible amount from him about the industry since. Just to flag that Demand Trans Solutions potentially has two kind of platforms that might be of interest to rural providers. One is their scheduling and dispatch platform called Mobility DR. And the second one that we're going to hear about today from Christine and Roger is the Mobility as a Service platform, which they acquired from a Finnish company in 2021. And they have since refined it for SJCOG. So with that, let me turn to our first speaker, Elliot McFadden from Minnesota DOT.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the very kind words of introduction. I'm feeling very appreciated with that. Let me just get my slides up here going. Just a second. Sorry, it was not quite in the place I was expecting with Zoom. Okay, so we should be good now. All right, I'm hoping folks can see that. And I'm realizing that my slides have my old title. So, I previously was in the role of the program manager for MnDOT's statewide shared mobility program, which included this work on our Mobility as a Service project. And so I've been giving these presentations and need to get my title updated. So thank you. So let me talk a little bit about our project. So, and talk a little bit about the market need. What we were seeing within public transit, as many people were seeing around the country, was an impact on ridership in both from COVID and coming out of COVID. And part of the state of Minnesota's greenhouse gas emission goal reductions include public transit as a key part of our strategy. And so it was important that we try to address this slower return of ridership. We did during the pandemic a research project with the University of Minnesota that looked at how both public transit and shared mobility providers could accelerate return ridership post-pandemic. Looked at a variety of different services and safety strategies that they could implement. And we found a significant number of folks being interested in either digital trip planning or payment as something that would help increase their likelihood of returning to public transit. And then we also saw over the last couple decades, as mobility as a service has been implemented, that we have had strategies and solutions that have been developed for highly urbanized areas, but the development of technology in this space for rural communities has been quite slow. So there's an opportunity there. So we ended up getting a project funded through a couple of Federal Transit Administration grants, including the Accelerating Innovative Mobility or AIM grant, and as well as a COVID-19 demonstration grant. And so for us, we were looking at a mobility as a service platform. And what does that mean? You hear that phrase thrown about, and sometimes it means different things to different people. So for us, it's a digital platform. It's a self-service platform that provides access for residents and visitors to all their shared mobility options, allows trip planning, fare payment, booking, and real-time arrival information where that is available. Public transit is the core service. But it is multimodal. So we look at how we can include other kinds of providers like private shuttles and buses, taxis and ride hail, scooter, bike share, van pools, car share, things like that, as well as emerging technologies like autonomous vehicles. And as I mentioned, we had 2 FTA grants. One was in southern Minnesota and one in western Minnesota that were looking at different research aspects of this technology, but helped fund the initial platform as a unified platform across both grants. And so you can see here an image of the providers that we worked with. We had 13 rural and small urban providers. This was important because this really gave us a microcosm of the different sizes and complexity of services, especially in rural transit across the region that would be representative of the whole state. But we also included Jefferson Lines and Land to Air, which is our intercity bus provider for the region, as well as Lime Bikes and Scooters in Rochester in the southeast. This is an overall schematic of our approach to mobility as a service. So at the top, you have an app, a consumer app that folks use to be able to do their trip planning, booking, payment, and such. But for that to work, you need to be able to have data that flows into that from lots of different sources. So you can have dispatching and routing and other kind of operational software. You can have data feeds that represent the transit services with which we use the General Transit Feed Specification, or GTFS, which is our industry standard for that. And then you have financial transactions. And one of the things that we did differently on this project than some previous MaaS projects is breaking out the API management from the app provider. APIs are those conversations that happen between different software platforms. And traditionally, what folks would do is you'd hire an app company, and they would go and do all of that management. The issue with that is then you're really stuck within that one app and the integrations that they have developed specifically for their platform. And we wanted the information to be shareable to third-party apps for transit agencies should they want to develop their own applications. And so we broke that out with our lead vendor, which is Cambridge Systematics, to do that management. And that gives us a more open architecture and an approach that doesn't necessarily have us stuck with a single app provider and gives us a lot more flexibility. Transit app is our primary consumer app. We also have a web-based trip planner that I'll talk about here in a second. And then Trillium, which is now also called Optibus, developed our GTFS feeds for us. So those data feeds describe the transit services. Token Transit providing e-ticketing. And then we worked with an existing provider, TripMaster, to do integration with the scheduling of demand response services. This is a little bit more detailed schematic to show you how data flows from the left-hand side from the transit agencies and other service providers into the orange box, which is our mobility hub. And that is the main core of our platform that Cambridge operates for us. It has three components: data warehouse. So that's historic data that's coming off of the platform. A feed aggregator, so all of those different transit providers and other kinds of providers give us that information, or we help them produce information that goes into a single feed. And so what that means is it makes it a lot easier both for Transit app, our app partner, but also third-party apps to be able to access the data all in one place. And then finally, we have this thing called OTP with GTFS Flex. So that's a little bit of alphabet soup, but OTP stands for Open Trip Planner, and that is an open source trip planning application. It is basically a search engine that allows you to plan transit trips. And then GTFS Flex is a version of that general transit feed specification for flexible services. So for demand response and deviated route services that allow you to show those kinds of services. So basically, we're providing kind of a whole data and search engine package for third-party apps. So if you had apps that didn't already have search engines, say somebody like Uber or Lime Bikes or somebody else that wants to put transit data on their platform, they can take advantage of our search engine and don't have to build that themselves. We leaned in very, very heavily on data standards. So using standardized data as a way to help make it easier to share. So as I mentioned, the general transit feed specification, we created feeds for all the agencies that did not have them. We also, by including the flexible data feeds, which were experimental at the time, we got Transit app to include that on their platform, which was the first major trip planning app to do so. And then, as I mentioned, provide the Open Trip Planner to support flex feeds for other applications. We also implemented an emerging data standard called the Demand Response Transactional Data Specification, or TDS. And that's to standardize the way we share information about actual trip bookings. So GTFS is about describing the service that you're looking for and being able to see what services are available. TDS describes things like customer name, pickup location, drop-off location, pickup time, drop-off time, that sort of thing. So we just show you here how GTFS Flex allows us within the Transit app to show these kind of routes that haven't been available before in trip planning applications. So we have a deviated route service in blue and a dial-a-ride service in red. You can see in the blue route, which is in Albert Lea in southern Minnesota, we have a set route that they'll take, but if you call ahead, they'll deviate off of that within a certain region to pick up or drop off of the main route. This you can see the little bubble that shows you actually where you can do that. So it allows you to visualize that and plan around it. In red, we have the rural provider True Transit that provides service, demand response dial-a-ride service for the region around Mankato, which is a city in southern Minnesota that is a kind of a regional center. And GTFS Flex allows us to show pick up and drop off, including the fact that you can pick up in their service area and go into Mankato, from Mankato into their service area, but they don't do point-to-point within Mankato because Mankato Public Transit does that. So you can show these pretty complex service levels using this information. And all of them have this ability included in that GTFS information is contact information. So now you can do a direct link and call directly within the app to the call center and reserve your trip. We did also, for folks who did not have access to a smartphone or didn't want to download an app, we have a web-based trip planner called mntransitplanner.com. Works a lot like if you've used Google or Apple Maps, gives you a lot of customization, but more importantly, again, allows us to show these demand response style of ride services. So you can see an estimate of the time that trip is going to take and all of the rules that are behind, how far ahead you need to reserve and contact information for that. The final thing we did was an integration, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, with TripMaster with 3 transit agencies using our demand response booking portal. So with Cambridge Systematics, we developed a portal that sits in between the transit app, actually sits on top of the transit app within someone's phone, but sits communicating between transit and TripMaster and allows folks to plan their trip within the transit app, be able to pull that information over into a trip request, submit that goes into the queue so that the transit agencies can schedule that, make adjustments. Any adjustments that are made, the rider can see that, and then the day of their trip, once the vehicle is left, they get a real-time estimate of arrival time. They can also manage their trips a little bit. They can cancel trips within the app as well. And so I'm going to just show you here real quickly a video of the transit app and kind of how things work within that. So here we're in Rochester. We're seeing several fixed routes. You see the little in the corner of the number, there's a little kind of quote looking thing that kind of flashes. That's showing you real-time arrival estimates. So we can pull that real-time arrival information in. Now we're going to show an example of how you would go about booking one of those demand response trips within the app itself. So the user here is selecting within the app a location. They can now see the options that are available for them, and now they have a book online button instead of a call button. So now that launches this portal. The first time they do that, they would register as a user, but after that, it's cached and remembered. So they will be, all their information will come in. If they didn't set a time ahead of time when they were doing the searches, they can do that at this time for their actual requested pickup time or arrive by time. And go ahead and put that in. They can also connect and learn more about the information, checking service and hours, so they can learn more about the service itself from within the app. And then they can click that submit button. And once they do that and that gets refreshed, they'll actually be able to see all of their upcoming trips and be able to manage those trips and get updates on them within that. We're also seeing here within Rochester, we also have Lime bikes and scooters. So you are able to do kind of multimodal trip planning within that as well. And we do also, for the transit app, we do also, in addition, have that booking functionality on our web-based trip planner. So you can plan those demand response trips with those 3 agencies there as well. And here's just a little bit of background. As I said, this portal actually kind of sits on top of the transit app. It sits in between these. So because we have used a data standard, the demand response transactional data specification, any trip planner and any demand response scheduling software can program their integration with us in a kind of an open format. Just a few things we picked up, some results and lessons learned. For our rural providers, we saw a flattening of call volume. So they used to get a lot of peak volume at the beginning of the day that put a lot of stress on their call centers. There was a flattening of that. We also saw more reservations being made further in advance and also more last minute reservations happening. So there was kind of where it was a little flatter across the way, there were sort of spikes in those two areas. And then finally, which is probably the most interesting to many of the folks on this call, is we saw a measured impact on ridership. So there was a 4.2% increase in ridership in the first 9 months that this was deployed, in comparison to a control group of transit agencies in Minnesota, rural agencies that did not have this software deployment, did not see any measurable increase in ridership. So there is an impact on this. For our urban transit systems, our small urbans, there was not a measurable effect, but we think that's mainly because there's more information out there on those agencies, like timetables and things at bus stops. From the operational standpoint, we had a goal of trying to hit 14,000 monthly users by the end of the pilot, which was back in April of 2024. We got very close to that, so we had over 11,000 users by the end of the pilot. We're now over that. We're at about 18,000 a month because Rochester Public Transit adopted the transit app as their official app. Our work helped drive the adoption of GTFS Flex. As I mentioned, that was experimental when we were starting to use it. So we provided a test case for the transit industry to look at, and now this is an official part of the data standard. So these are the first steps in getting other kinds of providers like Google and Apple to eventually be able to show these kinds of services. It was a little more varied on the adoption rates for contactless payment in the rural setting. So we had some agencies where they were getting 10% of their fares by the end of and increasing each month of users using the contactless payment in-app payment. And in some, it was only around 1% and didn't seem to be kind of moving. So that could be very particular based on the marketplace and the users. And then finally, we saw it was really important to do a concerted marketing effort. We had a delay in our marketing due to some contracting issues. And so the first 3 months of our project, we were only looking at a few hundred users a month. And you could definitely see once we finally were able to start implementing the marketing, usage really took off. But it's not enough to build it. You have to actually create a marketing campaign and communicate with your riders about it. Just a few other enhancements. As I mentioned earlier, we now have real-time arrival information on the day of booking within the booking module that launched back in March. We're going to be adding 7 more rural agencies in the 3rd quarter of this year. So we're looking at expanding and adding more of the state. And then on our future roadmap, we're looking at statewide deployment, how we can do things like a mobility wallet where we're bringing in lots of different services and having sort of a single payment area, integration with other sorts of transportation like parking, tolling, and a possible new distance-based fee that could eventually replace the gas tax. And then thinking about, especially in urban settings, how we can use the MaaS platform to help influence changes in behavior and get folks to ride transit and shared mobility options more often. With that, I will wrap up my part of the presentation and hand it back to our host and the next speaker.
Well, thank you so much, Elliot. As I've mentioned to you before, it's a fabulous project, and I'm so glad that you were able to share it with this audience today. So let me turn it over to Christine of SJCOG, who will talk about another application of MaaS.
Hi, everyone. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are located. Again, my name is Christine Corrales, and I am the planning manager with the San Joaquin Council of Governments, or SJCOG. The agency is the designated Metropolitan Planning Organization, Regional Transportation Planning Agency, and Local Transportation Tax Authority for San Joaquin County. And so for those of you not familiar with the region, I wanted to provide a little bit of context setting. San Joaquin County has a population of about 800,000, and our most populous city is Stockton with more than 300,000 residents. There are a total of 8 cities within the region, with the exception of Stockton. Most of our cities are small. They range in population from about 7,000 to 100,000 residents. And Mountain House is California's newest city, which incorporated in 2024. And then on this map here, you'll see that the land making up the county is primarily agricultural. Over 700,000 acres of land is in farming, and San Joaquin County is California's 7th largest producer of agriculture. Our top grossing crop is almonds. So if you're enjoying almonds today, thank you. You're welcome from California. The per capita income and median household income indicators in our region are less than California's benchmarks. This is just to provide kind of some social context of what are the needs in our region, especially how it impacts transportation access and mobility. And then in addition to these fun facts about San Joaquin County, you'll see in the blue inset map of California, our region is also part of what is known as the Northern California megaregion. We have the San Francisco Bay Area situated immediately to the west of us, and the Sacramento Capital Region immediately to the north. And what this geography means for San Joaquin County is that our jobs and housing markets are very deeply integrated with our neighbors. And in fact, the region has some of the highest rates of super commuters in the nation, meaning people commute over 50 miles or 1 hour just to reach a job site one way. That's a one-way trip. And another key geographic aspect of San Joaquin County is that we're also part of the San Joaquin Valley megaregion of California. We're the northernmost county of the valley. It's an 8-county region making up the inland part of California. There's 4 million people living here in the valley that make up 10% of the state's total population. And the valley is also known as the world's breadbasket. It's a very large agricultural region known for its fertile land and productive farming. Next slide. So today, I'll be talking about our Vamos MaaS initiative. The Vamos Mobility Smartphone application connects San Joaquin County residents with affordable, clean ways to get you where you want to go. And the Vamos app provides users with a convenient one-stop shop for transit trip planning and fare purchasing in San Joaquin County across all 7 of the transit operators providing service in the region. There are also new service integrations with ride hailing and car share that I'll touch on a little later, but this app is free and available now for iOS and Android devices. And on this screen, you can see some of the marketing we developed to promote the app. In Spanish, vamos means let's go. And so the marketing tagline, let's go anywhere, plays off of the Spanish meaning of the word vamos. And San Joaquin County has a significant Hispanic Latino population that makes up at least 40% of the region. And Spanish is the largest language group after English in our region. So over the next few slides, I'm going to go and briefly walk through the steps of getting started and how to use the Vamos app. If you can go to the next slide. So step 1, we'll have our users download the app for free on their smartphone from either the App Store or the Google Play. Step 2, the users will then have to register their email. They'll open up the app and they'll sign up using just an email address, and that email address needs to be verified. Step 3, next slide. Then users will be prompted to plan their trip. They could either enter a departure time, a starting location, a destination location, and then click search to see all the available options. And on the next slide, we will select our mode. So after clicking search in the trip planning feature, a user will see the various options or trip chains to take to their desired destination. Each of these trip chains offer different combinations of modes and services that are available in the Vamos app, including fixed route and demand responsive services. And then the user clicks on the option to see a detailed trip plan or instructions for making a demand responsive reservation or for using car share. Step 5. Once a user selects their preferred trip plan, they can then pay their fare within the app. The regional fare payment platform is called EasyHub, and it's built inside the Vamos app. So to pay their fare, users will need to enter a credit card, a debit card, or they can also use Google Pay or Apple Pay to complete their purchase. And then for users who don't need to do a trip plan, they already know what route they're going to take or what modes they're going to take. They don't need to do the trip planning steps. They can skip directly to the Easy Hub payment platform from the home screen and purchase their fares and tickets directly. And then step 6 is to ride. And before boarding, users must go to activate their tickets under the Easy Hub platform, and then they'll show their activated ticket to the transit operator when they board, and that's it. The transit services that are offered in the app include all 7 operators in San Joaquin County, including our commuter rail service, which is the Altamont Corridor Express, currently providing service to Silicon Valley. But that's not all. We've also integrated on the next slide 2 additional transportation services. Back in 2024, we integrated Uber, and we did introduce it in the Vamos app with a caveat that in order to use Vamos, in order to use Uber, Vamos users must first purchase $5 in transit tickets, and then they would receive a $5 Uber card, and the Uber feature would actually show up in the app for them. And this is a rolling benefit for every 30 days. We did implement this in partnership with our transit partners that are providing their fares and their trip information and route information in the app. When we sought feedback of how to introduce Uber, there was a lot of concern about substitution for transit trips if we did add Uber to the Vamos app. And so this was one of the policies that we put in place when we introduced Uber. And so Uber trips, once you purchase the minimum $5 in transit tickets, you can book an Uber trip within the Vamos app environment without having to link to an external Uber app or account. And then the second service that we've integrated is the Mio car share service. It's a 100% electric vehicle car sharing service available in the Stockton area. Most stations are in Stockton, but we do have one in Tracy and one in Escalon, with more planned throughout the region in some of our smaller communities. And this service is a lifeline for a lot of community members at this point. It's a very affordable at $4 an hour or $35 a day. And the trip booking is a feature that we're expecting to launch this summer in 2025. Next slide. And so just kind of bring it all back to the why behind the Vamos app. SJCOG saw this as a regional investment to improve the transit user experience. And some of the benefits that we wanted to highlight include seamless trip planning and mobile ticket purchasing, safe and clean boarding, which was an important feature that we launched in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's still available today. And in addition to that is improved communication and coordination amongst all of our transit operators in the region. With SJCOG as lead, there's a lot more interest for transit partners to work together as a region. And then the other benefit not listed here is that there's a lot of data on the ticket sales and trip searching that can really support transit planning and service improvements and even service coordination. One other thing I wanted to say about that slide. So we've been working on, if we can go back one. Yeah, we've been working on developing the app since 2019, so over 6 years. And just to give folks an idea of how much we've invested in this app, it's at least $1 million in local and grant funding to develop the MaaS platform. At least 70% of that probably went to the technology itself. So for the maintenance and the enhancements. And then the remaining funding went towards staff time needed to build institutional relationships, the marketing and the promotion aspect of the Vamos app, as well as a research evaluation. So to help SJCOG understand what the impact of this investment was, on the next slide, we partnered with University of California at Davis to conduct a research evaluation. And then UC Davis has been collecting user surveys on a quarterly basis since 2021 to help us really understand the impact of the investment in VAMOS. So on these slides, I'll provide some high-level insights about what the app is doing and impacting. So for example, on this slide, we know that the VAMOS users are primarily coming from car insufficient households. They represent households with lower income and individuals with travel limitations due to lack of access to a personal vehicle or not feeling safe to walk or bike in their area. On the next slide here is a summary of some of the survey data we collected on transportation security. And over time, respondents to our survey experienced less instances of transportation barriers that include having to skip appointments, arriving somewhere late, worrying about their ability to travel, and other factors. And then on the last slide here for data, when we integrated the Uber in VAMOS with the $5 transit fare purchase policy, the survey results are showing that the Uber integration had been successful in facilitating the use of Uber as a first and last mile complement and as a means of filling transit gaps. So there were some instances of substitution, but primarily it's looking like from the data that it's really helping people access transit rather than substituting, which could be applicable in other regions and especially rural areas. And then last slide, just to kind of sum up some of our big lessons learned over the last 6 years. What we've learned is that the possibilities for technology and MaaS are really unlimited. With each new feature or integration that we wanted to pursue, our team on the app development side was able to come up with a solution. But what is kind of like the limiting factor in implementation for MaaS is the institutional partnerships aspect and the coordination aspect. So that's something we learned along the way. Building and establishing shared goals, clear roles, responsibilities, and regular communication was important for success. And then for MeoCar, we're learning that there's really no limit on how much time you can spend on testing and tinkering before you launch a new integration or a new feature. But we're really, really hopeful that we've got it down to a T at this point. And so summer 2025 is when we're expecting to really fully release the full integration for MeoCar booking. And then lastly is the piece around data reliability and quality. The MaaS environment relies on a lot of data feeds. And if the data feeds are not updated or they're out of date, then we're providing our users information that they can't really benefit from. So when developing a MaaS platform and maintaining a MaaS platform, the data is really a key piece of providing a quality service. And then, so what's on the horizon for VAMOS? Again, the MeoCar integration launch, hopefully in a few weeks. SJCOG is also considering stakeholder feedback this summer to develop additional recommendations for future improvements. But some preliminary app improvements that we do expect to pursue include updating the transit data feeds to provide real-time arrival info, and then possible integration with some of our other initiatives at SJCOG, like our van pool program and our mobility hubs program. And with that, I think that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Christine. That's a really exciting project as well. And you guys have done so much. So let me now turn it over to Roger Teal with Demand Trans Solutions, the developer of the Mobility as a Service app for SJCOG. I wanted to make sure we had a technologist perspective available on the webinar. So Roger, take it away.
Thank you. Excuse me. So I'd like to, thank you for Christina for a really excellent presentation. And I'd like to speak a little bit about a couple things. One are just the advantages of integrating a MaaS platform with, demand responsive transit technology. Elliot spoke to how this has worked out in Minnesota. And again, I'd like to, elaborate on that a bit as well, because that's something that we have not done a lot of in the VAMOS situation in Stockton for multiple reasons, but we have done elsewhere, particularly in Denver. The primary reason for doing that level of integration is to enable a transit user to, basically create a trip plan that most effectively combines the transit services that are available in a region. And I'll walk you through an example of that in a couple of minutes. But when you do have both fixed route and demand responsive services in a system, then it makes a great deal of sense to do so. And I think it's significant that the majority, I think something like 75% of all of the rural transit systems have both demand responsive service and fixed route service in the same system. So it does make a great deal of a sense for this to occur. Jana, next slide, please. So here's, some information about that. Actually, it's closer to 80% of the agencies in the NTD provide both demand responsive and fixed route services. Again, this is the case even when the agencies are providing relatively small amount of fixed route transit. I also should add that nearly 40% of the trips by NTD rural reporters are provided by DRT services. So again, there's a substantial opportunity to use both of those service platforms to maximum advantage in a local area if they can both be integrated within a MaaS application, which both Minnesota has done, and we've also done within a metropolitan context in both Denver and the Chicago suburbs. Would you, move on to the next one, please, Jana? So this is and Elliot's, shown you something similar already for the Minnesota context in their statewide system. This is, again, something in a metropolitan context that shows the integration between a demand responsive service and the VAMOS app. Here you see a trip that wants to go between two relatively adjacent parts of the Chicago suburb, but they're in separate service zones. So it's going from a community of Batavia to a community of Winfield, and this is in the western suburbs of Chicago. So you can see at the top of the screen the origin and the destination. This is the view. There's a view from both the app and from a web-based booking platform. This is the web-based booking platform because it's easier to see the results. Again, this trip needs to get from point A to point B, but it can't do so directly on the demand responsive service. So next slide, please. So what the trip plan that the MaaS application finds involves a link on the commuter rail system, which operates throughout the day, not just during the peak periods in the Chicago region. So then this trip would involve someone being picked up, taken to the Union Pacific West station in Wheaton. Then they would be delivered to another station in Batavia. Later in the trip cycle. So then if you want to, you could book this trip. So next slide, please. So then this shows, again, this is the web view. You'd have a similar view, but more restricted on your smartphone app, showing what the customer has to do. On the right-hand side, it shows the instructions to the customer, what they'll need to be able to do to complete the trip. And this trip has already been booked in the system then. And finally, next slide, please. So this is, something that's sort of out of the box now, available in MaaS and in incorporated DRT applications. Again, Elliot showed you a similar situation for Minnesota, where the technology for demand responsive transit from CTS and the technology for the MaaS application is from the transit app. So again, this is a really important use case for for small services. There's a couple other things that I think are also worth talking about with respect to integrating MaaS with mobility services in a community. Christina's mentioned that the Uber integration, which we've done in the SJCOG region. I consider that really quite interesting. At one point, we were allowing people to get an Uber trip every 2 weeks. We did that as sort of as a demonstration project last year. So if you had bought a transit ticket, then you could buy another one within 2 weeks and get and unlock another Uber trip. And it turned out to be very, very popular. And I think this is what I consider most interesting. The Uber trip cost the person $15. Excuse me. The Uber trip cost $15. The person got a $5 subsidy. So that Uber trip costs $10 to that person. Yet virtually everybody who was doing these, having the capability to take Uber trips, seemingly was doing so. So it was extremely valuable incentive to people, because they were willing to pay twice as much as the incentive to be able to take an Uber trip.
Locking up for me. Is that happening for anyone else?
I'm okay.
I think it's my internet. My internet is telling me it's unstable. So keep going, Roger. I think you're fine for other people.
No problem. No problem. It also goes to the very interesting results that Christine showed from the University of California, Davis surveys. And I should note that those surveys were made possible because within the MaaS platform, we had, tools third-party tools that we had incorporated and paid for to make surveys feasible to people who were using Vamos. And by the way, more than 10,000 people in the SJCOG region have downloaded the Vamos app, and a few thousand seem to be, 2,000 or 3,000 seem to be regular users of it. So that UC Davis, survey showed that it was a very valuable tool for people who were using it, and the fact that their people were willing to spend twice as much out of their own pocket to take a trip on Uber as they were with the subsidized amount, I think this indicates the importance of being able to do this sort of integration, so we can incentivize people both to use transit and also provide people who more essentially are transit dependents with rewards, if you will, for being part of a large program like this. The other thing that I do want to mention as well here is that, and Christine alluded to it at the end of her presentation, is that we are looking at potentially integrating some level of commuter ride sharing into Vamos, and we're about to implement what we essentially have implemented. We need to turn on the EV car sharing. California has funded a number of local EV car sharing programs in small cities in rural areas. And this is a really valuable mobility option in these environments. Oftentimes it's difficult to get very many places on transit in a small city or semi-rural environment. And so there's been some services in Fresno County that have sort of pioneered the use of these EV car sharing services in housing developments for people that have, constrained mobility options in these smaller communities. So transit is not able to provide comprehensive service in these areas, and a mode like car sharing, I think, is quite important. And also travel to work. Both carpooling and van pooling options are needed for that. The Stockton region has one of the top 5 van pool programs in the entire United States in terms of its market penetration. It's approaching 500 van pools, and that's both travel to and from the Bay Area and travel north and south within the Stockton region itself. As Christine mentioned, there's many agricultural workers, and they are significant users of the van pool program. So making work trip options more available to people using the MaaS platform seems to us to be an extremely high priority reason for considering MaaS in a rural area. And finally, even though it's not on this slide here, I would like to comment a little on what does this cost? Because Christine laid out what it cost to implement this program in San Joaquin County. We've been underway there for 6 years, since 2019. So let's put that $1 million in a bit of context. But really, the best way to put it into context is to understand that what we have done for SJCOG is to put in place a platform that can be used by other entities anywhere. The cost of the platform for SJCOG is on the order of, I would say, $4,000 to $6,000 a month, just to keep the platform running. We also have the cost of keeping the GTFS feeds running. We use Trillium Transit. I believe they do the same in Minnesota for that. And that's going to cost another couple $1,000s a month. So this infrastructure, this foundational infrastructure is, significant investment. It's $120,000 a year overall. But if we were to add a small city onto that platform, we're looking at an annual cost of less than $10,000, probably more like $6,000 to $8,000 to add a small city onto the platform, if we wanted to do that in the Stockton context. So hopefully that puts these costs in the correct context. Yes, to implement and create a platform like this is not inexpensive, but to add other transit systems, small cities, etc., is actually extremely affordable, no more than $10,000 a year. So anyways, thank you. And certainly we're interested in answering any questions.
Okay, that's me. Sorry,
Yes,
slow at
yeah.
getting on here. So we've got a lot of great questions coming in, and I see that Elliot has answered many of these online. We may come back and revisit some of those. We have until, I think, 2:30 for the webinar, so we should be able to get to them. But I want to start with a question that came in during the registration. and this is a question that was directed to Minnesota, but I think, Christine, you could probably jump in as well. And the question is, with the new technology platforms, are you bringing in private sector non-emergency medical transportation and other ride providers to participate as part of the network? So looking at, is NEMT providers involved here?
None at this time. I actually, when I got permission to apply for the federal grant, I was told specifically not to include non-emergency medical because of the complexity, not so much the technology, but all the policy and getting all the partners, and that it could really kind of slow down our project. So right now we've been focused on the implementation of this within kind of more the general public space of public transit services and shared mobility services that are available to the general public. Having said that, we have built the technology that would, allow us to do some of that. Roger was involved in creating the basis of the demand response transactional data specification, and one of its initial use cases was to help coordinate those services. So it is something that we're thinking about. We have within our 5310 mobility management programming, we have what are called regional transportation coordination councils, and those are in different areas around the state, and they help to coordinate services between transit, non-emergency medical, other kinds of social services, transportation. One of our managers of that program is coming on board as a team member on the MaaS project to start thinking about how we would do that, possibly partnering with our Department of Human Services, and seeing how we could include that in the roadmap. So it's not immediately our most immediate focus is proving out the technology, the baseline technology, and expanding statewide for our transit systems. But we're definitely looking at opportunities for other kinds of coordination of services.
Great, Elliot, thank you. And Christine, did you have anything to add from SJCOG's perspective? Not at this time. Okay. So I know, go ahead, Roger, please.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question about the NEMT, and Elliot's response, I think, gets to both the challenge and the opportunity. There's little question that if you have a MaaS platform, there's almost an unlimited range of things that you can do with that platform. The hurdle will always be the organizations who are involved in that initiative, that they have to be on board with what needs to occur. They have to have the resources to be able to continue to participate. To give you an example, we were within weeks, months of turning on a feature in Vamos 4 years ago. COVID obviously had an impact here that would have enabled a volunteer driver program to actually serve transit-like trips for people, residents of low-income census tracts in the Stockton, San Joaquin County area. And then the organization that was sponsoring that basically fell on hard times financially. We had linked together with their car sharing, not their car sharing, with their volunteer driver program, with computer, systems integration and everything. And they were not able to sustain themselves. And this would have been a fascinating experiment to see how something like that could work. So you can do ambitious things with these platforms, but the organizations have to be able to understand that they want to do it and have the resources to sustain themselves while it's being planned.
Thanks, Roger. Elliot, if I can come back, because I know both Christine and Roger talked about costs, and just wonder if you want to talk a little bit about, from Minnesota's perspective, how this technology can be affordable to the most rural parts of your state and beneficial to customers in those locations.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard for one of I didn't mention my bio. One of our new charges as a unit is also going to be looking at transit technology for our greater Minnesota, so mostly rural providers, and kind of how we lead that at the DOT level. One of the things that I think is a challenge for rural providers is just having the market size and the being able to get the interest from vendors, because agencies are fairly small. There's, work done at an individual agency level. You're not getting the economies of scale that you can in more of a regional approach. And so I think that's why we've, when we look at like our local transportation coordination plans, their trip planning and fare payment was identified in the vast majority of them as something that agencies were interested in and wanted, but it's very difficult for them to do that in a one-off perspective. And then also, I think advantage of working regionally is we can build this platform that everybody's on, that has an interoperability to it, where if each agency does their own thing, then they don't necessarily all talk to each other. So that's all to say. The initial, I did post, there was some questions about cost. So the initial FTA pilots, the initial platform, all of the build out of the technology, the integrations, and then our first 2 years of operations on the MaaS platform was 1.9 million. It's the kind of the maintaining and incremental improvement is in the $300,000 to $400,000 range. But that's split across all of these different agencies, and for all of them to go and individually bid that out, not only would that not have staff capacity, would be a challenge for them, but the costs for them going after that one at a time would more than likely be more expensive. So, I think coming to this as a DOT, we can offer vendors a chance to get into a whole statewide market, which means we get more competition for the work. I would also say that because we have built a platform and an architecture that's designed to be an open architecture using open source resources wherever we can and data standards, it means that we're going to rebid this in a few years, and we will, we have the ability to be able to work with other vendors if the situation changes. So I think that's an important part of it as well.
Could I say something, Jenna?
Sure, go ahead. And let me just, before you talk, for others, if you're not talking, if you could mute yourself. So I'm getting some thumping and I'm not quite sure where it's coming from. So.
Okay, well, thanks. So while we've been talking here, I did a little back of the envelope calculations. So just looking at the NTD data for rural transit systems, and only looking at the agencies that provide bus services, about 400 of those. I mean, there's a lot more that provide demand responsive service, but just looking at the bus ones, they have a median annual budget of about $750,000. A mean average annual budget of about twice that, 1.5 million. Don't ask me why there's such a big difference between the mean and the median, but there is. So they could, using, if there was already a MaaS platform that existed like there is in Stockton, my estimate is that upper bound $15,000 to $20,000 a year would enable that platform to be used by an agency such as that. That includes the MaaS charges, and it also includes probably half of that is to hire somebody like Trillium to keep your GTFS feeds up to date. If that's something that you can do yourself, which most agencies can't do, then the second cost is not there. So that's basically saying that somewhere in the order of 1 to 3% increase in your budgets needed to afford this. 1 to 3% strikes me as a fairly small number. So I don't think there's, these are again are based upon our costs. I have no idea what the situation in Minnesota is, but I'm guessing that it's probably not radically different. So if a MaaS platform already exists in a region or a state, then the incremental cost of you joining and using that MaaS platform seems to me to be very modest.
I would say one other plug that I would say for us doing it at the DOT level is there are some aspects, Roger's mentioning GTFS, we're kind of at the point right now where it may make more sense for us to actually have a specialist at the agency that does that work. Where like it made sense for us initially to do that through contracting and have an outside vendor do that. But once you're getting this number of feeds that we're talking about, now we're thinking, is this make more sense for us? Is it more cost effective to actually have somebody in the agency doing that to support the transit agencies? And because we provide, for us, it's sort of, what's the most effective use of the dollars, because we provide the vast majority of the operating budgets for the 5311s through the pass-through of federal funds and our state operating grants. We provide quite a bit more on top of that in state operating grants. So, if the money will need to should be spent, let's figure out the best way to spend it that's the most efficient, but actually gets a good product also for all the agencies.
Yeah, just to follow on with that, what Elliot's saying is there's potentially very large economies of scale for something like a MaaS platform. I agree. I mean, why hire, the same people to do 20 implementations of GTFS if you can basically have a master contract or your own in-house staff do that? You'll save oodles of money. So, I mean, I think this is something that if there's states, there are obviously a number of states in the United States that do have a large number of rural transit systems, that the state DOT should be thinking about something like this so that all of its member transit agencies have the opportunity to benefit from platforms such as this.
Yeah, I know like Oregon DOT does GTFS work on behalf of their agencies for that very reason. And then there's also an issue of, when you have that single point, there can be kind of a quality control thing too as well. Many times the issue with GTFS with agencies is not having that person or contractor do the initial work, but keeping it up to date. And so we can build in kind of those controls for data quality as well. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. So just summarizing this conversation, there's definitely an important role for state DOTs and councils of governments and the equivalent planning organizations in rural parts of America, really those regional and state bodies that can offer those economies of scale and help. Christine talked about the importance of stakeholders, and we know how important stakeholder relationships, building those institutional frameworks is to making this work. We're also have received kind of a series of questions on more the nuts and bolts of doing the integrations, and we know this is so important. And Elliot, and you've talked about this a couple of times, that there's different ways of doing integrations with different platforms, and you can kind of take the standard proprietary approach and leave it up to the vendors to do it, or you can step in as a public body and look at data standards and what's out there today to build an open architecture that has possibly more sustainability, or that is a little bit the cost is perhaps more under control moving forward. So The question is, when you're integrating additional transit services, whether those be public or private, and those services rely on a vendor's platform for scheduling, et cetera, what have been the biggest issues, challenges of that integration? And how have you overcome those types of issues? What do people need to know, eyes open, moving into doing something like this before they would embark on this?
I mean, the biggest challenge for us is for the private sector is, getting them to be engaged and interested in doing this work. We are, CTS, which is the maker of TripMaster, did this demand response booking integration with us. We had originally planned on having 3 providers in that space on this project, and one of them, you can probably read between the lines when I say this, went through several acquisitions between when we put in this grant application and received funding, and then got to the point where we were ready to go to contract, and we were providing some development funding, to those existing software providers. And then the other company basically kind of initially committed, and then because of their, I think, kind of very strong marketplace position, didn't feel the need to do this. So I think getting those partners on board and getting them to see it's in their business interest to be a part of this is probably the biggest challenge. It's not that the technology is not that complicated. Relatively speaking, doing the data integrations, these are things that programmers just do. So that part, we can do things like data standardization that makes it easier to do those kinds of that kind of data sharing, but overall, even the more complicated things aren't that complicated. They aren't that difficult. It's about bringing those partners on board and helping them see the value. And to me, we've always had more interest from the smaller companies. They're looking to grow market share, looking to be the disruptor in the space, and the incumbent players are always the hardest ones to bring along because they're kind of fat and happy. They're not necessarily interested in the change.
And as a policy wonk, I kind of see another role for the feds and state DOTs and, kind of setting the policy framework for what sort of vision do we have for moving forward with our transit future, and how do we, architect that out?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that, like, separate from our conversation about MaaS, when we talk about technology, we do technology solicitations. So our rural agencies, if they're needing new technology or replacement technology, apply for funding to do that. What we're looking at now that we're, kind of established and investing in the MaaS platform, is looking at how we can use procurement to say, okay, if you're picking a vendor, they need to be willing and able to integrate with the system that we're building for the state. And those are things we can start looking at, and requiring just general interoperability, adherence to data standards. Those are things individual agencies can do at the procurement level to drive this conversation. And DOTs and the federal government as funders of transit could be helping to move that conversation along as well.
So I think we might have time for one more question, and I'm going to go into questions that have been answered online, but I think this one I want to just pull out, and it is for the Vamos app and the partnership with Uber. How do they meet the ADA requirements? Christine responded that it's not an ADA requirement with the Uber integration in Vamos. However, Uber must pay into a statewide mitigation program. Christine, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm not much of an expert on this, but what I do know is that to mitigate for the ADA piece, Uber has to pay into this fund. It's a statewide fund. And later the funds come back to the region and we can use those to provide enhanced ADA services. But SJCOG is not the direct recipient of these funds. They actually go to our regional transit district and then they determine how the ADA funding will be used to serve transit riders.
Okay. And I guess
Yeah.
in Minnesota, this is not yet an issue because the integration has been with public transit providers who are ADA compliant, correct?
Correct. I mean, we did for the RFP, we did have accessibility requirements for the software, and Transit App does do user testing with people with users with visual disabilities. So it is incorporated into the work that was done on the apps themselves.
Wonderful. Well, we are at 2:25, so I want to make sure we have time to throw it back to Robin and Rebecca for closing remarks. But I just want to thank our speakers today. You guys were really wonderful. It was very enlightening of what's going on out there, and best of luck to you all.
Super thank you, Jana. This webinar turned out to be all I could dream of, that I think we hit a lot of really hot topics and we got caught up with a bunch of people who haven't been involved with the MaaS platform to learn more about it. And I guess I would say I'm one of them, and that really thinking about how MaaS responds to the needs for our rural communities to create and build regional networks of service. And that means not just a service provider, but being able to access and utilize the resources that are available regionally for supplying transportation, and then for regional riders to be able to find those resources, not just by going from website to website to website, but in one place, so that we can start having conversations with operators about coordinating and responding to need. And we can have conversations with riders and organizations that need people to access service, employers, health, education. These are all regional resources that need regional access, and having a platform like this really seems like it can be helping move that conversation forward. And that's really why National RTAP got involved with this webinar, is that we see we need to be looking for all the ways we can to help communities respond to the needs, not meet every need, but respond to those needs and bring people to the table that can help find solutions. We are working with AASHTO because the states are leaders and provide leadership in rural areas, and with states around transportation resources and building resources that connect rural areas with urban. And that's the 5311F program, but it's also the transit programs through 5311 in every state. So I was really excited that we had good turnout for state DOTs on this, and that Rebecca and AASHTO are here to support us. Thank you everyone for joining, both as attendees and definitely our panelists. I'm really excited.
And with the last couple of minutes here, I'll just chime in. Robin, it's been wonderful to partner with you on this. It's been wonderful to hear from all the speakers. And I would absolutely agree with you. The reason why we, AASHTO, has been so excited to join this conversation, to advance this conversation, is because, like you said, Elliott in Minnesota is a great example that state DOTs are constantly seeking to provide support and also be leaders in harnessing this innovation and technology that's continually advancing. And the goal, I think, for all of us is to continue to provide safe and accessible transit to an increasingly modern world. And so it's wonderful to hear what kind of projects are being piloted across the country. And I look forward to seeing what comes out next. So with that, I will say this slide contains a QR code to the post-webinar survey if you would like to complete it now or following the webinar. There will be a link to the survey also sent out. Your feedback's always appreciated. The recording for this webinar will go up on National RTAP's website. And please don't hesitate to reach out. Our contact information is on the screen. I'm sure everyone here knows how to reach the National RTAP team. You are equally welcome to reach out to AASHTO and myself at my email address there. I know that Robin and I are both equally excited to answer any questions you all have and get any suggestions or ideas you all have for what you would like to see discussed in the future. So again, Robin, Jana, all of our speakers, and everyone on the call, thank you for joining in today.
Thank you. Robin, you're on mute.
Sorry. The contact information for the speakers will also be available. We want to make sure that everyone here, we're not ending the conversation. I think we're just starting it. So thanks very much.
Thank you.